My name is Teresa Langford. I am 67 years old. I have been a florist in a small coastal town in Maine for most of my life. Widowed for 12 years, I have built a life around my little shop, the scent of fresh blooms, and the quiet rhythm of the tides. Most of what I earned went into raising my 2 children, and I was proud of that. I believed that hard work, loyalty, and love would always be returned in kind. That belief ended on the night before my daughter's wedding. It was the rehearsal dinner. The room was warm with candlelight, the sound of laughter, and the clink of glasses. I was carrying a bouquet of lavender, freshly cut from my garden that morning. Lavender was always Melissa's favorite. When she was a little girl, she would slip sprigs into her backpack just to carry the scent with her. I wanted her to have this bouquet on her wedding day, a small piece of home in the middle of all the extravagance. I stepped toward the table where she and Ethan, her groom, were sitting. Before I could reach them, Ethan stood, blocking my path. His face was calm, but his voice cut through the chatter like a blade. "Teresa, you're uninvited. You don't belong here." It was not loud at first, but every conversation stopped. The laughter died. You could hear the hum of the air conditioner and the faint clink of silverware being set down. Melissa looked down at her plate, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She did not speak. She did not even meet my eyes. I stood there, lavender trembling in my hand. Inside my purse, next to my reading glasses and a packet of mints, was a cashier's check for $48,000. That check represented the entire wedding: venue, catering, the band, the flowers, the photographer, every detail that Melissa and Ethan had chosen. Every invoice bore my name. Every deposit came from my account. The bouquet felt heavier now, as if it carried the weight of every late night I stayed in the shop to fill extra orders. Every holiday I worked so my children could have what they needed. My throat tightened, but I refused to let tears fall. I would not give Ethan or anyone else here the satisfaction of watching me break. He stood there, tall and rigid, his jaw set. "You don't belong here," he repeated, louder this time, so there could be no doubt in the minds of the 50 or so guests watching. A ripple of whispers moved through the crowd. Some guests glanced at each other. Others quickly looked away, pretending they had not seen. I searched my daughter's face for any sign, any flicker, that she would stand up for me. All I found was the reflection of the candlelight in her lowered eyes. I could have spoken then. I could have reminded everyone that without me, there would be no grand ballroom tomorrow, no champagne toast, no custom menu embossed with gold leaf. I could have told Ethan that the only reason they were getting married in the most sought-after venue in the county was because I had paid for it in full. But I did not. I turned, the scent of lavender trailing behind me, and walked toward the exit. The silence in the room was thick. My heels clicked softly against the polished floor. Each step felt deliberate, controlled. In my mind, I could hear my own voice, steady and quiet. If I am not welcome at my daughter's wedding, neither is my money. By the time I reached the parking lot, the night air was cool against my skin. I sat in my car, set the bouquet gently on the passenger seat, and closed my eyes. My hands were steady, but something inside me shifted, like a door closing for good. Within an hour, every wedding payment would be frozen, and what I did next would leave Ethan speechless. When Melissa was 8 years old, she was already small for her age, with hair the color of summer wheat and a smile that could soften even the hardest customer in my shop. I remember one late afternoon in early June, sunlight spilling through the front windows of Langford Florals, catching dust motes that danced in the air like tiny fairies. I was building an arrangement for a wedding order, my hands working automatically. Roses, white lilies, sprigs of lavender for fragrance and texture, when Melissa wandered in from the back room. She was barefoot, her little toes tapping on the cool tile floor. She reached for the edge of the work table, but it was still too high for her. With a tiny grunt, she dragged over a wooden stool, climbed up, and leaned across to watch me work. Without asking, she plucked a stem of lavender from the bucket and tucked it gently into the bouquet I was making. "When I get married," she said, her voice solemn as if making a vow, "I want lavender everywhere, and I want you to make it, Mama, all of it." I laughed, smoothing her hair back, and promised her I would. Back then, that promise felt as certain as the tide. That memory came rushing back in sharp detail as I steered my car out of the venue parking lot, the tires crunching over the gravel in the dim light. The lavender bouquet lay on the passenger seat, the same one I had carried into the rehearsal, the same one Ethan had blocked me from delivering. Its scent filled the small cabin of my car, sweet but also sharp, almost bitter now. I kept glancing at it as though it were an old friend who had just been humiliated alongside me. The blooms were perfect, each tiny purple bud still intact, yet they suddenly felt like a relic from another life, a life where my daughter's word meant something, where she would have met my eyes in that moment and told her groom he was out of line. The road home wound along the coastline, dark except for the occasional flash of a lighthouse beam sweeping across the water. I rolled the window down halfway, letting the salt air mix with the lavender inside. My chest ached. The combination of scents took me back to a different night, one I rarely let myself revisit, the night my husband died. I had been in the shop late, trying to finish a funeral arrangement for a longtime customer. The phone call came just after 7. A car accident. By the time I reached the hospital, it was over. That night, after everyone left and the silence of the house threatened to swallow me whole, there had been a knock at the door. It was Gloria, my sister-in-law. She was still in her nurse's scrubs, her hair pulled back messily. She didn't say much, just held up a still warm apple pie in both hands and said, "You need to eat." I had stood there in the doorway, numb, the smell of cinnamon and butter wafting between us. She guided me to the kitchen table, cut me a slice, and poured me a cup of tea. I couldn't taste any of it, but the simple act of someone showing up, unasked, stayed with me all these years. Lavender in a bouquet, apple pie and grief. Those were the anchors that held me through storms. Now, driving away from my own daughter's wedding rehearsal, those anchors felt far apart, but still tethered to me. The lavender beside me was not just flowers. It was a thread running through my life, tying together moments of joy and moments of loss. It was the sprig Melissa once tucked into my bouquet, with a child's certainty that her mother would always be part of her biggest day. It was also the silent witness to Ethan's words tonight, to Melissa's silence, to the quiet unraveling of something I thought could never be torn. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, the leather cool under my palms. The bouquet shifted slightly on the seat with the curve of the road, and the scent seemed to grow stronger, filling every breath I took. I realized then that the lavender was no longer a promise. It was a reminder that love, even the deepest kind, needed boundaries to survive. A reminder that the people you sacrifice for can sometimes forget the cost. The house came into view at the end of the long drive, dark except for the porch light I'd left on. I parked, picked up the bouquet, and held it close for a moment before unlocking the door. Inside, the air felt still, waiting. I set the lavender in a vase on the kitchen table. It would stay there for now, its fragrance lingering, until I decided what to do next. And I knew I would decide. When I got home that night, the house felt colder than the air outside. I turned on the kitchen light, but it did nothing to warm the space. I set my purse down on the counter, the lavender bouquet beside it, and just stood there for a moment, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. My hands itched for something to do, so I walked over to the old oak cabinet against the wall. The top drawer stuck a little, as it always did, but I tugged it open and pulled out the stack of wedding contracts I had kept neatly filed. Each one was clipped and labeled, months of careful planning bound up in tidy paper piles. I carried them to the table and sat down, the wood cool against my forearms. I ran my fingers over the embossed letterhead of the first contract, the venue agreement. My name was printed in bold at the top, Teresa Langford, the client. Every deposit, every installment, every signature was mine. I had thought it would feel satisfying to see it all in one place, but now it only felt heavy, like a weight pressing down on my chest. I pulled the next folder toward me, the catering invoice, then the florist, the photographer, the band. Each page was proof that I had not just given money. I had given time, thought, and pieces of myself I could never get back. That was the part no one knew, the truth I had not spoken to a single soul. To come up with the final payment for the venue and the honeymoon suite Melissa had chosen, I had sold my white gold wedding band. It had been the last tangible thing I owned from my husband. I hadn't worn it every day in years, but I kept it in a small velvet box in my bedroom, tucked away like a secret. On the day I sold it, I remember holding it in my palm for a long time before walking into the jeweler's. The metal was smooth from years of wear, warm from the heat of my skin. It had been a symbol of vows that ended too soon, but it was still mine. Giving it up had felt like closing a door I never wanted to close. I told myself it was worth it, that I was trading it for something new, for Melissa's happiness. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the ring I still had. The rose gold band my husband had given me on our 15th anniversary. It was simple, with a single delicate engraving of a flower on the inside. I had kept it as my one remaining token, a reminder of the years that had been good. I turned it between my fingers, feeling the slight ridge of the engraving, the way the metal caught the light from the overhead lamp. My breath slowed. I laid the rose gold ring on the center of the top contract, the one for the venue. The contrast of the warm metal against the stark white paper made it stand out, almost like a seal. My fingers lingered there, resting on the band, and for a moment, the room was so still I could hear my own heartbeat. I imagined the ink of my signature months ago, when I had signed with hope. Now, the ring sat where a pen might, as if I were signing again, this time not with hope, but with loss, with resolve. I traced the letters of my name, printed at the bottom of the page. I thought of Ethan's voice, cold and certain, telling me I didn't belong. I thought of Melissa looking away. And then I thought of the white gold band, now in some display case, or melted down to be worn by a stranger. That trade had been my silent gift, my unseen sacrifice. And in that instant, I knew it was not just the ring I had given away. It was the assumption that my place in my daughter's life was unshakable. I picked up the ring again and held it tightly in my fist, the edges pressed into my palm, grounding me. Then I set it down gently beside the stack of contracts. I would not sell this one. I would not give it up for anyone's dream but my own. The lavender bouquet on the counter caught my eye, its purple blooms still perfect, as if untouched by the evening's ugliness. I rose, walked over, and brought it back to the table, placing it beside the ring and the papers. Side by side, they looked like the pieces of a puzzle I had finally solved. Love, loss, and the line I would no longer let anyone cross. I sat there for a long time, the quiet wrapping around me. I didn't need to speak the truth aloud to know it was real. I had given everything I could, and now I would start taking back what was mine. I stared at the contracts spread across my kitchen table, the rose gold ring still resting beside them. The lavender bouquet was close enough that its scent wrapped around me like a reminder of everything that had just unraveled. My hands felt steady now, but my mind was moving quickly, connecting pieces, calculating what came next. I reached for my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I knew would understand: Sophie Turner. Sophie and I had been friends since high school. Back then, she was the one who always spoke up when the rest of us stayed quiet. The girl who could turn a losing debate into a win with nothing more than a measured tone and a raised eyebrow. Life had made her sharper. She became a contracts attorney in Portland, specializing in commercial disputes. Over the years, we stayed in touch, trading holiday cards and the occasional lunch. I had once helped her pick out flowers for her daughter's graduation, and she had walked me through renegotiating my shop's lease without charging me a dime. The phone rang twice before she answered. "Teresa, it's late. Is everything all right?" I looked at the lavender, then at the stack of papers. "No," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I need you to check something for me. I have all the contracts for Melissa's wedding: the venue, catering, flowers, photography, the honeymoon. I want to confirm they're all in my name." There was a pause on her end, the sound of papers shuffling faintly in the background. "Do you have them in front of you?" she asked. "I do," I replied, already flipping to the top page of the venue agreement. Client name: Teresa Langford. My signature, my address, my payment details. All the deposits came from my account. "Read me the others," she said, her voice shifting into the crisp, precise tone I remembered from the one time I'd sat in on her court appearance. I listed them off one by one. Each time, Sophie confirmed what I already knew. "They're yours," she said finally. "Every single contract is under your name. That means you have full authority to modify or cancel any of them, regardless of what Melissa or Ethan want." I leaned back in my chair. The hum of the refrigerator seemed louder now, as if it were listening in. "So if I decide to cancel everything—" "Then it's canceled," Sophie interrupted. "No one can override you. They could try to rebook, but without your signature and payment, it's unlikely. And if any vendor tried to hold you to it beyond the cancellation clauses, we could fight it." I nodded to myself, even though she couldn't see me. Good. She hesitated, as if weighing her next words. Teresa, this is a big step. Are you sure? The image of Ethan's face, of his voice telling me I didn't belong, came back like a flash of lightning in the dark. Melissa's bowed head, her silence. The sold wedding band, gone forever. Yes, I said, my tone steady. I'm sure. Cancel everything, right now. There was no tremor in my voice, no lingering question. Sophie exhaled slowly. All right. Email me copies of the contracts tonight. I'll start contacting the vendors first thing in the morning. If you want, I can have formal notices drawn up so they're airtight. Yes, I said again. Do that. As I ended the call, a strange sense of balance settled over me. An hour ago, I had been told I was unwelcome, shoved out of a room full of people who had once been part of my life. Now, with one decision, the ground had shifted. The entire wedding, every flower, every song, every plate of food, existed because of me. And without me, it would unravel completely. I gathered the contracts into a neat pile, slid the rose gold ring on my finger, and placed the lavender bouquet at the center of the table. It was no longer a symbol of a promise. It was the marker of a turning point. I had been dismissed, but I was not powerless. They had made it clear they did not want me there. Now they would learn what it meant to have my presence and my support withdrawn entirely. For the first time that evening, I felt something close to control. The morning after I spoke to Sophie, my phone started buzzing before the sun was even fully up. The screen lit with Melissa's name. First a call, then a text, then another. I didn't answer. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, watching the steam curl and fade while the phone lit up again. A new message came through, the words sharp even without a voice to carry them. You are destroying my life. Another followed seconds later. Do you have any idea what this will do to us? I set the phone face down on the table. My coffee tasted stronger than usual, bitter on my tongue. In my mind, I answered her, but not in the way she wanted. No, Melissa, I am not destroying anything. I am taking back what is mine. I thought about how easily the words could be twisted if I said them aloud, how quickly they could become more proof for her and Ethan that I was selfish, unreasonable, cruel. So I kept them inside, where they stayed warm and solid, not up for debate. The buzzing didn't stop. A voicemail icon appeared. I didn't listen to it. I wasn't ready to hear my daughter's voice shaped around anger instead of love. Outside, the shop's sign creaked softly in the breeze. It was nearly time to open. I drained my coffee, took the lavender bouquet from the table, and placed it in the shop window. Customers would notice it, maybe ask about it. I didn't mind. Let them. Around mid-morning, I was in the back trimming stems when I heard the front door chime. Teresa? The voice was familiar, warm in a way I hadn't realized I needed. I stepped out to see Gloria standing there, holding a pie tin wrapped in a clean dish towel. The smell of cinnamon hit me first, so vivid it almost stopped me in my tracks. She smiled, though there was a softness to it. I baked this early. Figured you could use something warm. She set the pie on the counter, unwrapping it just enough for the golden crust to show. Steam curled from the vents in the top. I felt my throat tighten. You didn't have to do that. Gloria shook her head. Your family. And from what I hear, you've had a hell of a couple of days. She glanced around the shop. her eyes landing on the lavender in the window, but she didn't ask. Instead, she said, "I'm not here to talk about them. I just want to make sure you've eaten." For a moment, I didn't trust my voice. I busied myself finding plates and forks, letting the sound of the drawer sliding open fill the space where I might have said too much. We sat on the stools near the counter, cutting into the pie. The first bite was still warm, the crust flaking perfectly, the apples soft without losing their shape. "You're not wrong, you know," Gloria said after a few quiet moments. "Whatever they're saying, whatever they're telling people, you're not wrong. You did more than enough, more than anyone could expect." I looked down at my plate. "They don't see it that way." She shrugged. "They don't have to. You know the truth, and so do I. But you need to keep your strength up. This isn't over." Her words settled into me like the pie's warmth. Gloria had always been like this, solid, without the need for theatrics. Years ago, when my husband died, she had shown up with food and quiet company. No speeches, no false promises, just presence. That was worth more than anything else people tried to offer. We finished our slices in silence. When she left, she patted my hand and said, "Remember to eat, all right?" I watched her walk out to her car, the dish towel tucked under her arm, and felt the weight in my chest ease just a little. There was still a long road ahead, but for the first time since Ethan's words at the rehearsal, I felt less alone. Some people's loyalty doesn't waver when the air gets thin. They don't question whether you belong. They show up at your door with something warm in their hands and a steadiness in their voice. The pie sat on the counter, half gone, the scent still drifting through the shop. It mixed with the lavender in the window, creating a fragrance that felt almost like home. My phone buzzed, again on the counter. I didn't reach for it. Some messages can wait. Some don't need answering at all. I opened the shop early the next morning, but I didn't unlock the front door for customers. The sign in the window still read, "Closed." Today wasn't for business as usual. Today was for dismantling something I had built piece by piece over the last year. I made a pot of tea, set the lavender bouquet on the counter beside my phone, and spread the wedding contracts out in front of me. Each one was crisp, neatly filed, with my name printed in bold at the top and my signature scrawled across the bottom. They had been symbols of generosity once. Now they were tools. The first call was to the venue. I flipped to the agreement, my fingertip resting on the clause about client-initiated cancellation. I dialed, the phone cool against my ear. "Langford Florals." The receptionist answered cheerfully. "How can I help you?" I gave my name, the date of the event, and the contract number. There was a pause. Then, "Oh yes, we're all set for Saturday." "I'm canceling, effective immediately," I said, my tone as even as the line I had traced with my finger. A hesitation. "Ma'am, there will be a substantial cancellation fee." "There will not," I interrupted. Section 4B. Client may cancel without penalty if notice is given prior to the 72-hour mark. This is that notice. Process the termination. Silence. Then, a clipped. "Understood. We'll send confirmation." I ended the call and set the contract aside. One down. The florist was next. Not my shop. Melissa had chosen an upscale supplier in the city. I gave them the contract number, heard the rustle of paper on their end. "We have the arrangements in progress," the woman began. "You can stop," I said. "This is the client terminating the order." My thumb brushed over my own signature at the bottom of the page. a quiet reminder that this was mine to end. Third was the catering company. I could smell the rosemary chicken from their tasting menu in my memory, the way Melissa had leaned into Ethan's shoulder that day, laughing at something he whispered. I let that image pass through me like smoke and said firmly into the receiver, "This event is canceled. Refund per contract terms." The man on the other end started to protest until I read him the exact section and line number. He conceded quickly after that. The photographer was polite, almost relieved. "Of course, Mrs. Langford, we can open the date for another client. I'll email confirmation this afternoon." I thanked them, not because I needed to, but because it felt good to leave one conversation without the static of argument. Finally, the honeymoon resort. The contract wasn't technically a wedding vendor, but it was in the same folder, paid for with the same care. The clerk who answered had a warm accent and a gentle voice, but my instructions were the same. Cancel the reservation for Ethan and Melissa Whitaker. Yes, I am the one who booked it. Yes, I am the card holder. Each call ended the same way. Confirmation, documentation, my name attached to both the creation and the dismantling of this entire event. With every termination, I imagined a camera pulling in tight on the signature at the bottom of each page, the ink a little darker where my pen had pressed harder. Those strokes had once been for love, for a gift freely given. Now they were for reclamation. By the time I set the last contract aside, my tea had gone cold. I wrapped my hands around the mug anyway, feeling the ceramic's smooth weight. The shop was quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock. Outside, the world went on, cars passing, gulls calling. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. It wasn't satisfaction, not exactly. I wasn't celebrating a win. It was more like standing on solid ground after months of slow sinking. There was no rush of adrenaline, no need to raise my voice. Just the steady, grounded certainty that I had acted within my rights, that I had drawn a line and stepped firmly to my side of it. The lavender beside me gave off a faint sweetness, filling the air. I looked at it and thought of the little girl who once promised she would want me at her wedding. That promise was gone, but the scent remained, gentle, persistent, unmistakable. I took a deep breath, let it out slowly, and gathered the contracts into a neat stack. They would stay in my desk now, each one marked not just with my signature, but with the quiet decision that would change everything. The email from Sophie came just after noon. The subject line short and sharp. Statement. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, the lavender bouquet resting in a vase within reach, its faint scent mingling with the smell of coffee that had gone lukewarm. I clicked the attachment, and a PDF bloomed across the screen. Page after page of charges tied to the same credit account I'd opened for wedding expenses. I scrolled slowly at first, then faster, my eyes darting between the dates and the merchants. The duffel punch I had braced for, the $18,700 cruise booking, sat halfway down the first page, but it was surrounded by a constellation of other charges. $500 here for a day spa, $2,000 for a deposit at a high-end handbag boutique, another $3,600 for a private chef experience, the kind of thing you'd hire to impress friends in a rented villa. There were catering tastings in New York, not the local ones we'd attended together. Custom tuxedo fittings in a city neither of them had reason to be in. A diamond bracelet, not from my family jeweler, but from a store known for celebrity clientele. Every line item had a timestamp, each one a pinprick on the map of my last few months. They painted a picture I had refused to see clearly until now. I leaned back in my chair, fingers resting lightly on the trackpad, and felt the shift inside me. Something between grief and an almost surgical clarity. It wasn't just the wedding. It wasn't just one moment of humiliation at a rehearsal dinner. This was months, maybe years, of seeing me as a resource, not a mother, not a woman, not a person whose labor and history meant something beyond the next transfer of funds. I zoomed in on the cruise booking, my own name in the billing contact field, and read it twice. $18,700. Enough to replace my car, to put a new roof on the shop, to seed the retirement account I had been neglecting for their sake. And there it was, earmarked for a week of champagne toasts on a ship I'd never set foot on. My voiceover, if anyone could hear it, would have been low, steady. They didn't just want the wedding. They wanted my whole life as their wallet. I thought of the white gold wedding ring I had sold, the nights I stayed late at the shop, taking extra orders, telling myself it was worth it to give Melissa the day she dreamed of. I remembered the little girl in the lavender-scented apron and tried to reconcile her with the woman who now let someone else speak for her while I was told to leave. The statement pages blurred for a moment, not from tears, but from the tightness in my eyes, the way you feel when you've been staring into something you can't unsee. I closed the file, saved it to a folder titled Records, and shut the laptop gently. I didn't need to yell or storm out or call anyone in anger. I didn't need to plead for understanding. I just needed to keep moving forward, one fact at a time, one contract at a time, one truth after another, until there was nothing left for them to take. The lavender's scent seemed stronger in that moment, as if it too had decided to linger no matter how the air shifted. I sat still for a long time, the silence of the kitchen wrapping around me like a wall. Then I reached for my phone, not to call Melissa, not to call Ethan, but to text Sophie 2 words. Keep digging. The phone rang late in the afternoon, the kind of hour when the light starts to bend, sliding in sideways through the blinds over my kitchen sink. I saw Melissa's name on the screen and felt the small tightening in my chest, the same one I'd been carrying since the rehearsal dinner. I let it ring twice before I swiped to answer, my voice steady, neutral. Her voice came in fast, like she'd been rehearsing. Mom, please, you have to stop this. Do you know what this is doing to us? To me? People are calling, asking questions. The vendors are saying payments are frozen. Do you want me humiliated in front of everyone I know? Her breath hitched, the sound thin and brittle. I didn't answer right away. The silence stretched between us, a long, deliberate space. I could hear her breathing, waiting, maybe thinking the call had dropped. But I was still there, just letting the weight of her words settle without rushing to catch them. Do you? She pressed again, her voice cracking. Do you want me to lose face like this? When I finally spoke, my voice was calm enough to surprise even me. You're worried about losing face. I'm worried about losing myself. The words were almost a mirror of hers, but reversed. An old truth turned back toward her like a reflection in glass. She didn't respond right away, and I imagined her blinking, recalibrating, realizing I wasn't going to argue or apologize. Somewhere in the background, I heard the faint murmur of Ethan's voice, low but urgent. as if he were feeding her lines. "Mom, this isn't just about me," she tried again, softer now. "Think about the guests. Think about how this will look. You raised me to keep my word. You can't back out now. Please." I leaned against the counter, fingers brushing the rim of the lavender vase, and pictured the statement Sophie had sent me. The cruise booking, the handbags, the private chef, all of it lined up like a ledger of choices they'd made without a second thought for who was paying. "I kept my word," I said evenly. "I agreed to help with a wedding, not with a lifestyle I can't respect." Her breath caught again, this time sharper, closer to anger than sorrow. "So, you're doing this to punish me?" "No," I said, shaking my head even though she couldn't see it. "I'm doing this to protect me." The silence on her end was different now, not waiting, but weighing. I could almost feel her trying to decide whether to push or hang up. Finally, she said, "You've changed." I let that sit for a moment before answering. "Maybe I have, or maybe I just stopped pretending." I could hear the faint click of her jaw, the kind she always made when she was biting back words. Then the line went quiet, except for the background hum of whatever room she was in. "Melissa," I said softly, not to soften the blow, but to mark the end. "I'm not going to argue with you. My decision is final." Her inhale was sharp, but she didn't speak again. A second later, the call ended without a goodbye. I stood there for a while, the phone still in my hand, the kitchen quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. The lavender's scent reached me again, grounding me in something steady, something that hadn't betrayed me. I set the phone down, poured myself a glass of water, and took a slow sip. No one had won that call. But I hadn't lost, either. And in this moment, that was enough. By Saturday morning, my phone was already lighting up before I'd even finished my coffee. A message from Sophie was at the top. "You've seen Ethan's post?" I hadn't, but it took only a few taps to find it. His profile picture, all smiles and a pressed white shirt, sat above a single line that read, "Family doesn't always support true love." No names, no specifics, just enough to cast a shadow without pointing a finger. The comments were already dozens deep, filled with little heart, emojis, affirmations, and thinly veiled jabs at whoever the supposed villain was. I scrolled slowly, my thumb steady, my pulse not so much. An hour later, Melissa went live on Instagram. The alert popped up, uninvited, and I almost ignored it. But something in me, maybe the part that had stopped trusting her words in private, needed to see what she was willing to say in public. Her face filled the screen, blotchy from crying, hair loose around her shoulders. I never thought my own mom would do this to me," she said, voice quivering in a way I recognized from childhood tantrums and high school breakups. "We were supposed to be planning the happiest day of my life. And now I don't even know if I'll have a wedding." The comments scrolled by too fast to read them all. A few friends typed strings of "love you" and "stay strong." Others asked what happened, why I would ruin her big day. She didn't answer those directly, only dabbed her eyes with a tissue and sighed. "This isn't about money," she added, looking straight into the camera. "It's about control, and I wish she could be happy for me." The stream cut off a few minutes later, leaving behind a replay that would be shared and screen recorded before lunch. I didn't comment. I didn't call. Instead, I opened the Notes app on my phone and started a new folder titled Evidence. I screenshotted Ethan's post, Melissa's live stream, every comment that cast me as the villain. I saved each image with the date and time. Next, I went into my email and printed digital receipts from the florist, the caterer, the photographer, each one with my name on the payment line. I slid them into a manila folder, alongside the contracts Sophie had already reviewed. By the end of the day, the folder was thick enough to make a satisfying thud when I set it on the kitchen counter. I poured myself another cup of coffee and looked at it for a long time. The internet had chosen its side for now, and it wasn't mine. That was fine. People could talk. They could speculate, assume, and spread whatever version of the story they liked. But stories change when the truth is laid bare. And when the time came, I intended to have every piece of mine ready. When Melissa was 17, I was working 3 jobs. Mornings started at the diner, pouring coffee for men who tipped in crumpled singles. Afternoons were spent at the florist, arranging bouquets for other people's celebrations. And nights, I cleaned offices long after their lights went out. It wasn't because we couldn't make rent, we managed that. It was because Melissa had a chance at a scholarship that required proof of extraordinary effort, and I intended to give her every possible edge. She wanted to study abroad in France. I still remember the way her eyes lit up when the pamphlet arrived in the mail. All glossy photos of Paris streets and ivy-covered universities. Tuition would be partially covered if she got the scholarship, but travel, housing, and living expenses were on us, on me. I told her not to worry. I'd make it happen. And I did. Every tip, every overtime shift, every tired morning when my back ached and my hands smelled faintly of bleach. It all funneled into her dream. One spring evening, I came home from the florist with my hands full of lavender. It was on sale because the stalks were short and the buds a little faded. But Melissa didn't see imperfections. She saw beauty. She snipped the stems at an angle, humming while she tucked them into the bouquet I was making for a wedding order. I watched her, thinking about the life she might have. A life where she wouldn't need to work herself raw, just to afford an opportunity. That memory came back to me tonight, sitting alone in my living room with only the amber glow of the table lamp beside me. The house was quiet, except for the slow tick of the clock on the mantel. I had the photo album open across my lap, the pages heavy and familiar under my fingertips. I turned past baby pictures, her in the little yellow sundress I'd sewn myself, her first day of kindergarten with the backpack almost bigger than she was. I slowed at the high school years. There she was, hair swept up, wearing the prom dress we'd found secondhand, but altered together until it looked like it belonged on a runway. In her arms was a bouquet of lavender I'd made for her that afternoon, tucked with pale roses and tied in a satin ribbon. My finger lingered on that image, tracing the curve of her smile, the way she leaned toward the camera as if she could step out of it and into the room. Back then, I thought that smile meant gratitude, love, and trust. I thought it meant she saw me, not just as the provider, not just as the safety net, but as her anchor. Now, in the silence of this living room, I wasn't sure what it meant anymore. The lavender in that picture was just like the one I'd carried to the rehearsal dinner. Same scent, same color, same intention. To honor her, to stand beside her in a moment that mattered. And both times, I'd believed we were bound by something unshakable. I closed the album slowly, holding it against my chest for a moment before setting it on the coffee table. The light from the lamp fell across the cover, catching the embossed gold lettering of our family name. It struck me that in some ways, I was still that woman from years ago, working quietly in the background, making sacrifices no one asked about, expecting nothing in return but a place in my daughter's life. The only difference was that now, I understood how quickly that place could be taken away. I leaned back in the armchair, breathing in the faint, lingering trace of lavender from the bouquet still in the kitchen. Memory and reality overlapped, a bittersweet echo of who we had been and who we were now. And for the first time since Ethan's words at the rehearsal dinner, I felt something shift, not in anger, but in clarity. Some bonds are kept alive by one person's work, and sometimes, when you stop tending them, you realize they were only rooted on your side. By the third day after the rehearsal dinner, my phone had turned into a siege weapon. It didn't ring just once or twice. It rang in waves, each call another volley from the people who thought they knew what was best for me. First was Aunt Linda. She didn't even say hello. "Teresa, you need to fix this," she said, her voice sharp, with the kind of certainty only someone outside the blast zone could have. "You're the mother. You have to be the bigger person. Weddings are about love, not grudges." I told her I was fine, but she barreled on, tossing phrases at me like they were moral obligations. Be the adult, keep the peace, think of the guests. The call ended with her sighing into the receiver. "Don't let your daughter hate you for the rest of her life." It didn't stop there. My cousin Ray called next, lowering his voice into that conspiratorial tone people use when they're about to betray your trust. "Look," he said, "family's messy. But it's still family. Don't make this something she can never forgive. Do the right thing, Teresa." By midday, I'd heard the same refrain from 3 more relatives. All of them repeated variations of the same script. Weddings are once in a lifetime. You don't get to rewrite the ending. Sacrifice yourself for harmony. None of them asked me what Ethan had said to me in front of a room full of people. None of them cared to know the sting of being told I didn't belong at my own daughter's wedding. After the last call, I sat at the kitchen table staring at my phone like it was an enemy I couldn't put down. The lavender bouquet was still in the corner, wilting slightly, its scent now sharper, almost bitter. I pressed my palms together and tried to steady my breathing. That's when the question rose up, the one I'd been pushing to the edges of my mind since the first ring of the phone. Was I committing a kind of sin by cutting my own daughter out of my life? It was an ugly question. The kind that doesn't just knock, it kicks the door open and sits down in the middle of the room. I thought about all the years people had told me a mother's love was supposed to be unconditional. I thought about every time I'd bitten my tongue to keep the peace, every sacrifice I'd made without announcing it. Was this the moment I'd break that sacred rule? But then another thought pushed in, quieter but sharper. If love means erasing yourself, is it still love? Or just servitude with a softer name? I imagined the version of me they wanted. Smiling, forgiving, writing more checks, swallowing the insult like it never happened. I could play that part. I'd played it for years. But the cost had always come out of my own skin, my own sleep, my own dignity. In the stillness of the kitchen, I felt the weight of that cost. It was more than money. It was the slow erasure of the woman I used to be. I thought about the night Ethan's words burned through the air, about Melissa looking down instead of speaking up. I thought about how fast they'd spent my money, how easily they'd counted on my silence. The phone lit up again. Uncle Steve this time. I didn't answer. I let it ring until it stopped. I wasn't ready to say it out loud yet, but deep down, I knew the truth. Protecting myself didn't make me a bad mother. It made me a whole person. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like reason enough to hold the line. That night, after the last of the calls had stopped and the house finally fell into its familiar quiet, I pulled a sheet of cream-colored stationery from the drawer. The same kind I used years ago to write thank you notes and birthday cards to Melissa when she was away at college. My hand hesitated above the paper for a long time before the pen touched down. I started with her name, plain and unadorned. Then the words began to flow, not in anger, but in the slow, steady current of memory. I wrote about the winter she was 6, when she came down with the flu, and I stayed up 3 nights straight, sleeping in a chair beside her bed so I could press a cool cloth to her forehead every hour. I told her about the afternoons I skipped lunch at the flower shop, drinking tea instead, so I could stretch the grocery budget far enough to cover her ballet classes. I reminded her of the way I saved every flyer for scholarship fairs when she was in high school, the way we sat together, filling out forms until midnight, my hand cramping from writing. I told her the part I had never spoken aloud, that when the scholarship fell short, I sold my white gold wedding ring, the one your father slipped on my finger in the spring of 1982, the only piece of him I had left besides the photographs and the smell of his old sweater in the back of my closet. I wrote about standing in the pawn shop, turning the ring over in my palm one last time before letting it go, thinking it was just another small price to pay for her future. The pen scratched on. I didn't dress the words up or try to make them noble. I told her I was proud of every sacrifice, but I also told her that each one had come from a place of choice, not obligation. That I gave because I loved her, and because I believed love was a seed you planted without keeping score. And then I wrote the part I needed most for myself. That love does not mean erasing who you are to keep someone else whole. That the day she let Ethan tell me I didn't belong, without speaking up, something inside me shifted, not into hate, but into clarity. By the time I stopped, 4 pages lay filled before me. I read them once, quietly, the way you'd read a prayer you weren't sure you believed in yet. Then I folded the pages carefully, slid them into an envelope, and sealed it shut. I didn't write her address on it. Instead, I tucked it into the second drawer of my desk, beneath the folder that held my will and the deed to the shop. I sat there for a long while, fingers resting on the smooth paper, feeling the weight of what I had written. Not for her, but for me. It wasn't a letter meant to change her mind or win her back. It was the truth I needed to set down, the map of all the roads I had walked for her, ending at the point where I finally turned toward myself. When I closed the drawer, I felt a stillness settle in my chest. Not peace exactly, but the first shape of it. I had given my side of the story a home, even if no one else would read it. In that moment, it was enough. The morning of the wedding broke clear and cold, the kind of early autumn day when the air feels sharper, almost metallic, and the horizon looks washed clean. I woke in the small cabin I had rented by the bay, a place I'd chosen for its quiet. The floorboards creaked softly under my feet as I padded to the kitchenette, brewing coffee that filled the room with its steady, familiar warmth. From the front porch, the view stretched wide, slate blue water rippling under a thin veil of mist, gulls circling and calling overhead. I wrapped myself in a thick wool cardigan, the same one I'd worn the winter Melissa left for college, and took my coffee down to the narrow strip of beach. The sand was damp and cool beneath my shoes, the tide pulling and releasing with its ancient rhythm. I told myself I wasn't going to think about the time, but by noon I was aware, too aware, of what the day held elsewhere. The ceremony would start at 2. Somewhere, Melissa would be having her hair pinned, her veil smoothed into place. Somewhere, Ethan would be checking his tie in the mirror. Somewhere, the lavender I once promised to arrange would be sitting in a vase I'd never touch. Back inside, I lit the small wood stove, letting the flames eat at the kindling until they caught. I tried reading, but the words blurred. I set the book aside and sat at the small table by the window, watching the light shift on the water. At exactly 2:03 p.m., the phone rang. The sound split the stillness. Sharp, insistent. I didn't move at first. The second ring came, then the third, each one cutting through the cabin's soft hush. I could have reached for it. I could have let my voice spill across the line, asking how she looked, wishing her well. I could have pretended, just for today, that I was still part of it. Instead, I stood and walked to the door. The phone kept ringing behind me, muffled now by the distance. I stepped onto the porch, the boards cool under my bare feet. The wind off the bay caught the edge of my hair, carrying with it the salt and the faintest scent of seaweed. Out on the water, a lone sailboat leaned into the wind, its white sail flashing in the sun. I stood there until the ringing stopped. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, layered with the sound of waves folding over themselves, the slow creak of the dock, the distant call of a gull. I realized I had crossed something invisible, not by walking forward, but by standing still. I wasn't waiting for permission. I wasn't reaching for the comfort of a role I no longer recognized. I let the call go unanswered, and in doing so, I refused to step back into the space where my worth depended on being needed without being respected. The tide had turned by the time I went back inside, the water pulling farther out, revealing strips of wet sand and glistening rock. I made another cup of coffee, sat by the window, and let the steam rise into the quiet. Somewhere, music was playing. Somewhere, vows were being spoken. But here, in this small cabin by the bay, I had chosen my own threshold, and I had chosen not to cross it. The week after the wedding, that wasn't unfolded like a film reel I hadn't planned to watch, but couldn't help noticing in the periphery. My phone stayed on silent, but the screen lit up with the kind of news that didn't need words. First came the post from the venue, a sunlit shot of their ballroom, captioned simply, "Now available for fall bookings." The date was supposed to be theirs. The room was supposed to be filled with the scent of lavender, with glasses clinking and cameras flashing. Instead, it was just another open Saturday on their calendar. I didn't smile exactly, but something in my chest settled. Then the florist uploaded a story, an arrangement of deep burgundy dahlias, tagged with a last-minute booking discount. The caption read, "Had a cancellation, happy to create something new." I recognized the stems that should have been Melissa's bouquet, though in the photo, they belonged to someone else entirely. One by one, the traces of that day unraveled in public view. The caterer posted a video of their team serving a charity fundraiser instead of a wedding dinner. The photographer's feed showed an elopement on a mountaintop, light pouring through the clouds. Even the honeymoon resort posted a beach sunset with the caption, "Available this week. Message us for special rates." I didn't comment. I didn't like or share. But I took screenshots of each one, tucking them into a folder I named Ledger. Not out of spite, but for the quiet kind of record-keeping that told the truth without needing to shout. Doubts began to surface in places I hadn't expected. On a mutual acquaintance's post, someone who had once been quick to defend Melissa, a comment appeared. "If you can't pay for it yourself, maybe don't insult the one who did." No names, no direct tags, but it didn't need them. The truth has a way of slipping through, even when you try to stitch it closed. I sat at my kitchen table, the afternoon light slanting across the wood, scrolling through these small ripples. There was no triumph in it. Not the kind people expect when you think of revenge. It was quieter, slower, like a tide pulling back to reveal what's always been beneath. Somewhere out there, Melissa and Ethan were dealing with the fallout. Maybe they were explaining to guests why the day had changed. Maybe they were spinning another story to make themselves look like the wronged ones. It didn't matter. My hands were clean, my contracts voided, my obligations met and ended. I closed the folder on my phone and set it aside. On the counter, a single sprig of dried lavender leaned in a jar by the window. Its color faded, but its scent still sharp. I breathed it in and let the quiet fill the room, knowing I didn't need anyone else to confirm what I already knew. I had done the right thing. And sometimes, that's the only victory you need. The shop was quiet that morning, the kind of quiet that feels like a held breath. I unlocked the front door, switched on the lights, and was met with the soft hum of the cooler. Buckets of blooms lined the wall, but my eyes went straight to the bundle of fresh lavender I had ordered for myself. Not for a wedding, not for anyone else's table, just for me. I trimmed the stems the way my hands remembered, angled cuts under cool, running water, then gathered them into a simple glass vase. The scent rose up, clean and sharp, and for a moment I was back in that tiny flower shop years ago, when Melissa was 8 and standing on her tiptoes to tuck a sprig into a bouquet I'd made. She had grinned at me like she was adding magic. The bell over the door jingled, and Gloria walked in carrying a brown paper bag. "Morning," she said, smiling as her eyes fell on the lavender in my hands. "You look like yourself again, like the woman I met 10 years ago before all the storms." I laughed softly, setting the vase on the counter. Maybe I am. Or maybe I finally stopped standing in the rain without an umbrella. She handed me the bag. Inside was a still warm loaf of bread. Breakfast. And before you ask, no, it's not pie at this hour. Even I have rules. We moved to the small table by the front window. I poured hot water over mint leaves, letting the steam curl into the air. On the sill sat the dried lavender from the rehearsal, its stems brittle, its purple muted to gray. Beside it now was the fresh bouquet, full of color and scent. The two arrangements stood together, past and present sharing the same space, loss and renewal, side by side. I held my cup between my palms, letting the warmth sink in. There was no ache in my chest today. No need to defend myself, just the quiet knowledge that I had chosen peace over chaos and dignity over a place at the wrong table. In my mind, I heard the words I would never say out loud to Melissa. Peace doesn't come from holding on to everyone. It comes when you finally understand who is worth inviting to stay. I took a slow sip, watching the early sunlight spill across the counter, catching on the glass vase, making the lavender glow. And for the first time in a long while, I felt full. Before we say goodbye, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee? Or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let me know in the comments. I read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. Not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, I hope you carry this story with you. And remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and I'll see you in the next story.